what do you call them? Us?
Karachiite, yeah.
Karachiite, okay. This is good. We are going to have a conversation together, Naila and I. We've both been working in the arts and creative industries for over 20 years, but we wanted also to have a conversation amongst ourselves. So this isn't just going to be Naila and I talking to each other. We want us all to talk together. Because the topics that we're going to talk about, well, they've affected all of us. COVID, separation, movement across boundary lines, that's something that's affected all of us. So I think most of you know Naila, so there's not much of an introduction to give. But I feel really privileged to be sat here on this platform with her. A visual artist, a documentary photographer, somebody that explores urban spaces and human rights, an educator, somebody who really values people's growth and development, and working at Indus Valley, and also crucially director of Vassal Arts, which I've long been a fan of. So Naila, it's a real privilege to be sat here having an opportunity to have a conversation with you.
And privileged to be in conversation with Dr. Samina, and who has a long, prestigious career in facilitating art, and I'm just going to read a little bit about what she's done. That Dr. Samina Zahir has over 20 years of research and consultancy experience working with art organizations, creative industries, artists, and development agencies. She founded Hybrid in 2001, providing a range of specialist support to help drive and facilitate successful cultural community projects. She specializes in action research and is familiar with processes of research, action, analysis, evaluation, leading to change in partnership with stakeholders. I'm just reading the whole. She's the author of Speaking the Truth to Power, the first Arts Council England epistolary report on identity, ethnicity, and aesthetics, with Professor Gus John and Arts and Refugees for Art Council England, Baring Foundation and Paul Hemlin Foundation, just two of nearly 100 evaluations and research that Hybrid has produced. So and of course she's involved in a lot of other things. She has curated public projects, and she was involved in extensive commissioning and program experience during the 2012 Olympics and Creative People and Places. She's a fellow of the RSA. So that's quite a, illustrious career, I must say. So, yeah, you want to open?
Yeah, so for both Naila and I, we talked earlier, and we realized that what runs through us is this interest in art in society and what creativity means within society, the issues, what people are experiencing and facing, and how it can affect change. So, Naila, I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about your journey. What has brought you to this point? What brought you to this anthology, and the ability to reach so many artists who have such beautiful voices on really difficult topics of our day? So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, my career actually began as with activism, with political activism. So that's where I was coming from, and I felt I needed the facility to communicate better, and that's what took me to, art education so that, and my work also reflects, has been documentary work, and it is about, bringing issues of gender and gender inequalities, and I work in places like labor rooms and madrasas and, in inner city kitchens, and with traffic Bangladeshi women. So, those are the issues that I work with. So it still runs in that vein. And of course, art as protest, art as means of, as a pedagogical tool of educating people, and art and in recent times, art bringing together in grief, in pandemic, in educating people of how to deal with a crisis,
Yeah, I think that's something we realized we shared, that idea of how a creative practice can help people to connect and communicate. And that sense of representation can happen in a much less threatening way. People can become more absorbed in a practice, in a message, when that creative element is strongly there. Tell me a little more about how the arts makes that connection. And the book has so many examples of where that connection happens. Is it the mic?
Yeah. Somebody testing a mic, I think. Outside, I think. Yeah, that's okay.
Right. I thought it was the mic and there was something I could do.
Yeah. No, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
So give me some examples of where you feel this has happened really well.
Right. So, we can even open this, but I feel that, how art reflects reality. And in reflecting reality, it, when it oh, I see. So yeah. So when it reflects reality, it gives a better understanding of that reality, and it gives a better understanding of dealing with that reality. And I'm sure that everybody in this room has had moments in their lives when. At some moments in their life, there has been some song, some poetry, some writing, some music, some painting, some photograph, some scene has given them solace or given them an understanding. Because what art does is that, or artists do, or art has the power to do, writing has a power to do, is to give you a representation of what the possibility, that reality, gives you a reality and understanding, which gives you a solace, which gives you a way of understanding that reality. Like in pandemic, when poets wrote, when artists drew, people reached out. It gave them an understanding, a better understanding of the world. And that brought not only solidarity, it brought solace. It brought some psychological relief. I thought that was a very important power. So many anthologies came out of poetry. So many anthologies of writings came out. So much art came out of doctors who were drawing, who were, they have been, doctors have been scribbling poetry down on their masks, and drawings that they needed to, because that was the only way they could find therapy.
Yeah. I think that's something that we also experienced in the UK, that people found ways to communicate and connect. So where performers couldn't perform in buildings, they performed on bridges, on street corners. We had performers who would go to their neighbours and do mini performances, simply acoustic, just to connect with each other.
Right.
We had arts organisations that would post pens, pencils, creative activities, thinking about how do we connect, how can we keep this social connection.
Right.
And I don't know, I'd love to hear whether anybody in the audience also connected through a creative way. Did you write to each other? Did you, yes?
Because we had some help.
I think a lot of people actually felt that they had so much time, things were closed, around us there was so much suffering, that they could the time needed to be used to actually lead something out of themselves, which is what you're saying. And they painted. And I know during the time that we had the 2.5 years of COVID, I don't think I've ever been so prolific in painting as I've been in this time. But it was basically, it was recording. It wasn't just leading out of oneself, but it was recording the incidences on the streets and the suffering that we all felt, but which we couldn't connect with. And the State Bank of Pakistan actually did a wonderful exhibition during that time by asking people from all walks of life to bring in paintings that they had actually done during the COVID closures. And they did. And it was a wonderful way of seeing from the youngest to the oldest what they had produced.
Brilliant.
Okay,
And
thanks.
that, in a way, is what helped the anthology, because people were, as you say, they were producing, they were sharing, and they wanted to reach people through that production. Tell us a little bit more about the anthology.
But you know, I'm taking this away because you know, in medieval times, during the time of Renaissance, there was a series of epidemics, I would say, plagues and epidemics, and there's a lot of art which relates to saints helping. You know, there was a quarantine, and the saints helping people, you know, in gestures, benevolent gestures. So, and those paintings were a tribute to health workers. Essentially what we are doing, the tribute to health workers that's been happening, which is happening graphically in photographs, on social media. So the form has changed. You know, and that period of Italy was very visual. And so is the time that we are living in. We are bombarded with images. You know, this is a very visual culture we are living in. So, you know, that kind of, it's much easier to communicate. But there are forms of communication. For instance, this, I must say that when I was putting this book together, anybody we asked, they were so forthcoming, and they just opened their hearts, and it happened across borders in India as well. That anybody we asked, they asked 2 other people to contribute, and it was never asked where was this book being published. So the geographical divides were really broke down because this was a universal moment in time, like no other that we will witness in our lifetimes ever. And in the book, I also say that the pandemic and climate change are the 2 defining events of this century. And the pandemic, since it was even today, an average of 350 people are dying every day in the US, just US alone, every single day, so there is a magnitude of pandemic still that is living, people still suffering. And so I'm just going to read, and I apologize, it's in Urdu. I'm going to read 2 poems to you. One is by Iftikhar Arif that he sent to me, and one is by Zahra Nigah. And what Zahra did was that she said, I'm going to read it and you just record it on your phone, because you know, she's unpublished poetry. So, and there are 2 forms of very different forms of lamentations or protest, and how लिखेंगे दर्द की शिद्दत कम नहीं होती, मौत की दहशत कम नहीं होती, बैन फुगां फरियादें मातम रातों को सोने नहीं देते, जी भरकर रोने नहीं देते, सो लेंगे तब शेर लिखेंगे, रो लेंगे तब शेर लिखेंगे. So this is a very classical Urdu lamentation, you know, but coming out of Sher-e-Ashob genre of poetry, you know. And then there is Zahra Appa, who is just writing about in open prose, she's just writing and questioning the whole premise of pandemic, the imposition of washing your hands often every 30 seconds, staying 6 feet apart, that these are the impositions that are coming from the West onto us, onto the global South, which cannot follow those rules. So she's writing, शहर की एक कच्ची बस्ती में घर की आधी छत के नीचे पप्पू बैठा सोच रहा था, पीने को पानी नहीं मिलता, बार बार हाथों को धोना और साबुन से धोना, और घड़ी भी देखते जाना मेरे बस की बात नहीं है, मेरे बस की बात नहीं है। ढाबे में टीवी चलता है, हर पल खबरें आ जाती हैं, इतने मर गए, इतने बच गए, नुस्खों की बारिश होती है, बाहर आना जाना रोको, इतने फुट का फासला रखो, पप्पू बैठा सोच रहा है, मेरा घर 9 फुट चौड़ा और 18 फुट लंबा, अम्मा बाबा दादा दादी हम साथों और चाचा चाची सब मिलकर इसमें रहते हैं, आना जाना कैसे रोकें, कैसे सब में फासला रखें, पप्पू बैठा सोच रहा था। So, this is the reality being depicted. So if someone connects to one, the other connects to the other, right? There's something that would resonate to one. Another one, small one by her, Raja Rani. मोटर धोने वाली रानी, गजरे बेचने वाला राजा, मांगने वाला राजकुमार, तीनों अपने घर में खाली बैठे, शहर में एक वबा क्या फैली, उनकी किस्मत फूट गई है, उनकी हुकूमत टूट गई है. So this is just one of the few ways. I mean, it resonated with me, that's why I'm reading it. I'm sure something else would resonate with you in English or in some other language. Yes. Yeah. So, I'm sorry, I just read this in Urdu, but there's some of the translations. Yes.
One of the things we talked about was the way that art is most poignant, most powerful often at moments of deep emotion. And there's been a lot of talk about how important art can be in messaging, in activism, in encouraging, in motivating. And we talked a little about some of those really crucial thinkers, writers, activists who draw very much on their arts practice. I'd love to read the Arundhati Roy.
Yes, sure. And yeah, absolutely. But before that, I'm just going to read one little quote that while I was reading something, I came across it, and it just made me think for 3 days about it, that this is how the sickness travels best, through all the same channels as do fondness and friendship and love. So, I mean, that's the whole question. Do we stop loving? Do we stop, or do we... So these were the questions that are in your mind, but suddenly somebody articulates it for you. So that's and I wanted to show you some slides of the works that are not only collected from South Asia, but some of the works that were done in England and in Europe and in Japan. But we're saving that for next time. So, one of the people who very graciously said to use their work was Arundhati Roy, and you're going to read a little passage from her here. Thank you.
The pandemic is a portal. What is this thing that has happened to us? It's a virus, yes. In and of itself, it holds no moral brief. But it is definitely more than a virus. Some believe it's God's way of bringing us to our senses. Others, that it's a Chinese conspiracy to take over the world. Whatever it is, coronavirus has made the mighty kneel and brought the world to a halt like nothing else could. Our minds are still racing back and forth, longing for a return to normality. trying to stitch our future to our past and refusing to acknowledge the rupture. But the rupture exists, and in the midst of this terrible despair, it offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we have built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. We thought that piece was really strong, particularly when accompanied by another piece by an author who was Sri Lankan and who had experienced some of the avarice and prejudice in his own life. And one of the things we talked about was the difference that representing this reality can make in our world, in the real lived world. Let's hear that little piece.
Yes, so this is a young Sri Lankan artist, very powerful artist, whose work also appears on the cover. And he sent his work, but what resonated more was his statement, because he lived through a civil war. And in the middle of one night, his father was dragged and killed in front of him. So that kind of things that people have lived through or will live through or are living through, and when compared to pandemic, which of course became such a big force, and for all of us, we do not realize that there are bigger forces of evil that exist side by side. And the Black Death, the deadliest plague that happened, that killed 200 million in 1234. If we were, and I've included some of the passages, if we were to read them, they seem so fresh and they seem so as if they are point of, as if it is happening right now. So this is just a paragraph from his statement. This is the time to understand the inestimable pain of those who have suffered, who are suffering, and who will suffer around the world before, during, and after the pandemic. Our focus and our hope should not only be for a future without biological virus infecting life forms, but one without the abominable social viruses of war, racism, lack of empathy, and disrespect of the natural world. So now that's the other issue that is looming, which is a respect for natural world, which is the issue of climate change, and how we are sitting on it, but we are ignoring it. And we are, in Pakistan, we have just been, with all the floods, we have just been the recipient of, we have just seen what it could be, what it could mean. And some of the people who have the least amount of carbon footprint in the world are the people who suffer the most. And how what art can do, the South African apartheid, the whole movement was given so much impetus by performers and singers and artists. And so this is something that can be, that can be dealt with just on this scale. Not that it would make a difference, not that it's going to bring about the kind of change that is needed, but at least it's going to bring about the consciousness that's needed to bring that change with the writers. Yeah.
And that was something we would really love to hear from you. We said at the start that although this is in conversation between myself and Naila, we wanted to draw you into that conversation and to ask, contagious connectivity is about crossing borders, crossing perceptions, challenging normal. As Roy said, we need to challenge that. We need to challenge what normal is. So in your creative practice, what are the messages that you would want to share that would help Pakistan send the right messages out? What are the things that you would want to say in a creative way? What are the stories that you might want to tell?
Or in your daily life, or in your, in your thoughts, or in your hopes.
I'd just like to introduce myself because I'm a teacher, and I believe that one of the ways in which climate change can be made something that people would be aware of is to make our learners and children aware of what is happening. And I would say that I'm a very strong proponent of this movement to help learners know what they have to do, what they must think about under the present circumstances. And as a matter of fact, we have given a lead in this in SPELT by having at least one article in every quarterly journal about global issues in language learning. And so put climate change as one of them and have lesson plans which are ready to be disseminated. They're disseminated to members of those who are members of SPELL, but they can be disseminated to others also, because we have these lesson plans which can be used by teachers with content in it, talking about it, how to help.
Yes, and towards the back. Can we get the mic back?
Hi, my name is Anoki Ali Khan. I'm a pediatrician and a public health specialist and epidemiologist. And what I find really important is, where I work and the way I see things is at the symptomatic side. So when children come who are sick, etc., unvaccinated, preventable diseases, etc., where I find art incredibly, whether it's the written work or otherwise, incredibly important, is to, especially as the lady in front said, especially to involve the next generation, the younger generation, but also using it as a way to educate them about, for things, for example, preventive medicine. Fine, we had the pandemic, but what nobody's talking about are the small epidemics, not so small epidemics that we're having in Pakistan constantly, measles outbreaks. During the floods, we saw diphtheria on the rise again, something that people have not seen in the West for God knows how long. One polio case is considered an epidemic, and we've never been polio-free. So, I think it's my personal experience. I'm done with the adults. I think you need to start pulling in the next generation and pushing them to basically take it to the next level.
I think that what I'm going to say is going to not be very easy on a lot of people. In our bastis, during the COVID pandemic and even before, we have the poorest and the poorest of the families, and very few people representing them. We have got thousands and hundreds of COVID orphans. We have so many COVID orphans who are living on the streets because, as it is, they live in very small houses, in one-room houses, and as Zahir wrote in her book, the family lives together, so if one member got it, the next got it, and so on and so forth. In most cases, mother and father died. We have done no studies on this whatsoever. And yet we have these young girls, young children, young boys running around on the street because there's no one to look after them. There are no orphanages, there's no government work being done on them, for them. They are too poor to go to school for people to pay their fees. We're trying to get them into orphanages so that they will have some safety under a roof and not be abused and assaulted. This is the ugly side of the pandemic. You're talking about creative connectivity, but then this is the ugly side of the pandemic, and I think just to have we need to think about this. We also need to think about whether posters, whether artwork, whether art classes, or women who can volunteer to actually do some work with them. But more important than that, these children are stateless. They have no documentation whatsoever. And I think that it's time to actually approach NADRA and to say to them they open a department where we can register these orphans so that they have that 4x4 card, which will mean that they can actually go to a hospital or to a school or have admission to a school or be able to sit an exam or anything in their life. That life, a 4x4 card, as actually their passbook for the rest of their life. So would please the many ladies that are here, including yourselves, this connectivity to life after the pandemic is very much something we need to consider.
You see, I think there are people there. Besides that, there are 3 million Bengalis in this city, in the city of Karachi, who are stateless, who have no status. And their children cannot study beyond 8th grade. So, and there are NGOs working on this, because this is a state problem, state policy problem. And, वो शेर क्या है, अतिया के मगज़ को बाग में जाने न दीजो कि नहा खून परवाने का होगा. What it means is कि this little, that don't let the bee go into the garden, because if it goes, it's going to make a beehive, and the beehive, and there's going to be wax, and there's going to be a candle, and eventually the moth is going to die. So it's a cause and effect, right? So it's everything is a build-up.
Sadly, we have the orphans. We don't know what to do with the orphans.
Right.
Sadly, we have the orphans.
Right.
It's not a matter of poetry. It's not a matter of art. We have the orphan children. We need to do something.
Any other thoughts, comments on? Yes, please. The mic's coming.
This problem is, it should be dealt with at a basic level. And we are passing the buck when we think that it has to be in an educational school, or why don't we start at home? I think that's the best education that children can have. And parents are spending time with their children, so take them to outings, take them, because I've seen that whatever happens in the city, for the first time I've seen that young people are coming out. Otherwise, young people are missing. And actually, even all our I don't like the word icon, but I will use it because I can't think of another word. Any event, like children relate to dramas, to actors, to fashion models quite easily. But I find them missing wherever you go. They're not to be seen. So for me, I think if we just say education and you relate it to art, we've got to see some very basic things first. That's all I want to say.
See, the thing is that we are talking of creative people and how they can help and how creativity echoes within that. But these are not problems that can be solved on individual levels. These are problems that need policy intervention by state. We cannot eradicate hunger without policies, but what the issues are that those who are the people who can bring awareness to the policymakers. Right?
And I think that's something that we talked a lot about how that creative approach that is valued, that is looked at as something positive. What are the messages? How can it be used in education? How can it be used informally in homes?
Right.
It's not as threatening as this direct order, this command approach. It has that softer, gentler approach that stops people shutting down. An order often makes people defensive, whereas a creative engagement opens people up to things.
Right.
And I think that's where arts and creativity can really move things forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Just to take it forward, my name is Shanaz Ramzi. I've been working with the Heritage Foundation for many years, and I'll play a little bit of the devil's advocate here with due apologies. But I find that, yes, we have a lot of serious issues, and definitely children on the street and orphans are, I mean, nobody's denying that that is an issue that has to be looked into. But what I'm saying is that when we talk, when we are focusing on creativity and how that can also help, I have witnessed firsthand that it's a very therapeutic method that you can engage people who've been traumatized. We did it at the time of earthquakes, we did it at the time of floods, again in COVID where people have lost family and all, and we've taught them how to be creative, we've taught them how, people who've never, kids who've never used paints, who've never used color pencils, just given it to them to let it all out, and it's helped them mentally, So it is something that is, it's a very powerful tool that one can use. And we took it further to teach women how to make things with clay and tiles, and there's a whole community of previously they used to be all begging for a living, who are now all earning an income through creativity and through art, because they were taught how to use their hands. And you have proof of that when you go to Densho Hall and you see that whole Raghujar street. The tiles have all been made by these women. So, there are lots of ways where you can use creativity.
Sure. And I've done workshops in Orangi in which we have taken children and said, and given them cameras, little cameras that we got, and said, go and photograph things that bother you. And they've done that, and we have hung that, and said we are doing an exhibition, and then we have talked about good images, bad images, and what bothers you and why it bothers you, what can be done. And it was done in a creative way and not in a way that is, so little things to educate them, whose responsibility. We can't tell them to clean up the garbage, but we can tell them to responsibly dispose of it, maybe, so that's sort of a engagement. So we're going to end now. We're going to respect at the end of our time.
Okay. I have a comment, Meg.
Yes.
Last comment. Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Nasir. The good thing about this session was it was a freewheeling conversation. It wasn't kind of one centered around. So I think because of pandemic, there was a depression, but it really inspired artists to become, more producer of the art. And I think more art was produced, and I think those books which were unread by me, they were read. I mean, pandemic had a negative aspect. It really produced a great number of writers, and most of the writers in India, whoever talks about pandemic, I produced a book. I mean, actors did produce the book, so I think it was positive and negative.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for that comment. But I'm just going to read you a couple of things from here, just two small paragraphs, which is actually reminded me of that what happens, how, when this time passes, how do we remember the past? How do we, we just remember it through writings, through images, right? And how would we remember this pandemic? So it is perhaps, this is from my intro, perhaps this is how this time will be remembered, with poets, artists, and writers as record keepers who not only observe, but they enact a moment in history. And of course, I'm also going to read you a little poem that we have included in the front and something at the back. So it gives hope, it's uplifting. And this is Muhammad Salimur Rahman's poetry. मेरी आरज़ू यही है कि शफ़क़ के रंग देखूं, वही रुत हो बादलों की, वही नील गूं अंधेरे, वही लाल और सुनहरी सी नदी पे शाम की चुप, वही बस्तियों पे बदली के लहू भरे फरेरे. And on that note, we will end. Thank you all for coming. There's so much happening in the city and in this venue, and thanks for attending the session.